This is the second part of 8.2. We were doing multiplying yesterday, and so we are doing factoring today. It says yesterday we distributed a monomial to a set of terms in a polynomial by multiplying. What I explained to you is that this was a process. It's like the distributive property on steroids, which what I meant was that it was just simply a basic distributive property like this, 15x plus 20, but they just put a whole bunch of junk around it. So they gave you something like 5x squared y times 2xy to the third plus 4xy to the fourth, and you had to do all the extra stuff. But this is still the same general concept. It's just that they made it a little tougher. That was yesterday, but today what we're going to do is something called factoring. Just so you attach it in your memory, factoring is the opposite of distributing. And since we can understand the distributive property connects to multiplication, and since they are opposites, it means that factoring is just a higher form of division. So whenever you hear someone say factor, it pretty much means you are dividing. So whenever you see factor, think divide. Factor means divide. Factor means divide. In order to factor appropriately, we must first identify the GCF. This is why we practiced what we did yesterday and the days before. Afterwards, we simply divide. Again, that's the key word in mind. Each term by the GCF that we found. And that is the process. So a quick example for factoring is to take 15x plus 20. And again, factor means divide, and in order to divide, it means I have to find the biggest number I can divide by. If I don't know what the GCF of 15 and 20 is, just take the smaller number and do the factor tree for that. 1 times 15, 2 doesn't go, 3 times 5, 4 doesn't go, 5 is there. 15 doesn't go into 20, 5 does. It means that my biggest number that goes is 5. Now I'm not going to write GCF equals 5, I just pull it off. Because again, factoring means I am actually pulling something out of here by dividing it. They don't have any x's in common, so what I do now is I open a set of parentheses. Because I am pulling 5 out of both of these. And what I do again, and now I remember this is division, 15 divided by 5 is 3. I did not touch the x, the plus stays plus. And then when you look at this, 20 divided by 5 is 4. That's all. Like that's factoring. You simply find the number, you pull out what they have in common, and you carefully place whatever is left over inside of parentheses. As it says here, if you look back at the first example of the day, you should notice that all we did was work the same problem in both directions. Notice in the beginning, we took 5 times 3x plus 4, turned into 15x plus 20. When I showed you factoring, I took 15x plus 20, and we factored it out to be 5 times 3x plus 4. In algebra, there are always 2 directions for everything, and pretty much that's what it is. So the point of my lesson is that you have enough experience to understand the process of factoring because you already know the distributive property. If anything, you understand what it should look like whenever we factor. So whenever you see this question that says factor, you know what distributive property looks like, so you know what it should look like when you actually do it. And keep that in mind. And then you can actually even check it and say 5 times 3x is 15x, 5 times 4 is 20. It allows you to actually use more of your common sense, which is really what you want to live off of in terms of mathematics, because it gets you a long way. As it says here, it's also possible to check our answers by doing the distributive property mentally. And again, this is best learned through practice. So let's just look at some examples before we go to the class practice for the day. Keep in mind, all of these examples represent different types of situations. All these questions are not the same. You have to learn to classify each type. So there are different types in each one. Factor 9x plus 12. So again, we look at this, and we know that factor means divide, which means I'm looking to see what's the biggest number I can divide 9 and 12 by. I don't think I need a lot of thought to recognize that that number is 3. I also recognize that both of these do not have a variable in common, so I simply open up my parentheses. And again, the word is divide. Factor means divide. 9 divided by 3 is 3. The x stays the same. Plus 12 divided by, again, factor means divide. 12 divided by 3 is 4. Do a quick check. 3 times 3x is 9x. 3 times 4 is 12. That is your answer. And that is all you have to do. You just have to remember that factor means divide. And you have to also make sure that you go back and check. It should look like a distributive property question whenever you're done, because they are opposites. So whenever I distribute, it looks like something I can factor. Whenever I factor, it looks like something I could distribute. 10x minus 8 to be factored. Again, this means divide. It means I need the biggest number I can divide by with 10 and 8. Both of these are even and they're pretty close. I think 2 is my number. Both of these do not have a variable, so I open my parentheses and create my distributive property. And again, factor means divide. 10 divided by 2 is 5. The x comes down. Minus 8 divided by 2 is 4. Do a quick check. 2 times 5x is 10x. 2 times 4 is 8. The minus went along for the ride. That is all. C. Factor 6x squared plus 5x. Here we have this situation, so looking at this is different because whenever I go to divide, because remember factor means divide, I'm trying to get this stuck into your head. Factor means divide. I don't think there's anything I can divide 6 and 5 by. And just to check, let's do a tree for the small number 5. The only numbers that go into 5 are 1 and 5, which means that 5 doesn't go into 6, and 1, of course, we don't write. But here's what we have here. Even though 6 and 5 cannot be divided, we do have x's on both terms. So remember from yesterday, we picked how much they have in common, or whatever the lowest amount is, and they both have at least one x. So what we will do here is literally pull off one x. Now I know that factor means divide, but if you think back to our rules, when we divided variables, we subtracted, because remember division was subtraction. So whenever you pull off a variable, think about it as you are taking off one x. So the 6 did not get touched, but again, here we have two x's. We took one off. We should have one left. Plus comes down. 5 did not get touched. Here we had 1x, but we took it off, so there shouldn't be any more left. And again, a quick check. 6x times x should be 6 with 2 x's. 5 times x should be 5x. That is your answer. So you notice that I've given you problems where you take off numbers. I've also given you problems where you take off variables. That's why I said you have to keep in mind there are different types of questions. D has no numbers at all, and again it wants me to factor, which means divide or take out. There are no numbers, but notice that both of these have x's, so we look and say how many do they have in common? They both have 2 x's. And so remember, when it comes to variables, we are simply taking off 2. If we had 3 x's and we took 2 off, we'd be left with 1. Plus, if we had 2 x's and we took them off, we're left with nothing, but we need a placeholder here, and that placeholder is 1. So if you ever factor off everything, something divided by itself, or if I took it all off, remember there's actually a 1 in front of this number, and that's what would come down. Quick check. X squared times x is x to the third. X squared times 1 is x squared. That is the answer you're looking for. And then we get into the ones where you have both. So you have ones where it's just a number coming off, you have ones where it's a variable coming off only, and then you have one where you have both, where you look here and you say 6 and 4. Again, factor means divide. 6 and 4 can both be divided by 2. But if you look at the variables, they both have at least one x, but they actually both have 2 x's. And now you have to pretty much place everything peacefully, or piece at a time. There are actually 4 things to consider here. There's the number, the variable, the number, and the variable. And so what we do with the number, remember factor means divide, is we do 6 divided by 2 is 3. For the variables, we are pulling them off. There were 3 x's, we took off 2. There's 1 left. Minus comes down. 4, numbers wise, remember we divide. 4 divided by 2 means 2. I had 2 x's, I took 2 off, they are gone. Quick check. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 plus 1 is 3. 2 times 2 is 4. And there are the 2 x's that we should have going along with that. It's not bad. It's just going to take some work. And again, you have to be confident in the fact that you are smart enough to do this. 24 and 20. If I don't know what the numbers are, again, go off to the scratch work. Pick the smaller number. 1 times 20. 2 times 10. 3 doesn't go. 4 times 5. 5 is already there. 20 obviously does not go into 24. 10 doesn't go into 24. 5 doesn't go into 24, but 4 does, which means the biggest number we'll take off is 4. In terms of x's, they both have them, and the smallest amount would be 1 because they both have 1 x. Keep in mind, 1, 2, 3, 4 things I have to change. 24 divided by 4 is 6. I have 2 x's. I took 1 off. I'm left with 1. Minus comes down. 20 divided by 4, because remember factor means divide. 20 divided by 4 is 5. X, I took it off. It's gone. A quick check. 4 times 6, 24. 1 and 1 make 2. 4 times 5 is 20. 1x right there. You should not factor these kinds of questions without quickly checking them, because there's no reason to miss them, especially if you're just making small mistakes, because all you have to do is just stop, check to make sure it makes sense before you move on. And then the final type is factoring, where you have three terms. So it's really not anything different. You just have to think of three numbers, 10, 12, and 6. Well, you could go to 6, do the GC or do the factor tree, 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Does 6 go into 10? Nope. Does 3 go into 10? Nope. Does 2 go into 10? Yes. Does 2 go into 12? Yes, which means that 2 is the biggest number you can use. And in terms of x's, again, remember we picked the smallest amount, and the smallest amount of x's we have is 1. So the only thing we have to do now is remember that we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things to place. And so we do 10 divided by 2, because factor means divide, which is 5. I had 3 x's, I took 1 off, I'm left with 2. Copy your plus. 12 divided by 2 is 6. I had 2 x's, I took 1 off, I'm left with 1. Copy your minus. 6 divided by 2 is 3. I had 1 x, I took it off, it is gone. That is all you have to do. But notice that I'm not rushing through, and I honestly factor like this. Even though I've been doing math longer than you've been alive, I factor this way all the time. So I don't know how any of you who are just starting are just going to like blow right through the numbers and say this is 2x 5x squared plus 6x minus 3. Most people are not that good, and if I say by most, I mean there might be 1 out of every 3,000 people that can do this easily, because there are small mistakes, and by easily I mean without mistake. And the whole point of your test, the whole point of your quizzes is not to make a silly mistake. So slow down, take your time. Here we have 15x to the fourth, 35x to the third, 10x squared. Again, they want us to factor, which means divide. And so we look at the three numbers and we need a GCF. Again, the easiest thing to do, take the smallest number, make a tree for that number. Yes, it takes work, but you can do it. 10 doesn't go into 15, so there's no need to check it. 5 goes into 15. 5 also goes into 35. 5 also goes into 10, which means that 5 is my number. I then look and say, what's the smallest amount of, or most amount of x's I can take off without taking too many, and that's 2. And then I recognize that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces. And so 15 divided by, because factor means divide, 15 divided by 5 is 3. 4 x's, I took 2 off, I'm left with 2. Copy the minus. 35 divided by 5 is 7. 3 x's, took 2 off, I'm left with 1. Copy the plus. 10 divided by 5 is 2. 2 x's, took 2 off, they are all gone. That is my answer. A quick check. 15 with 4 x's, 35 with 3 x's, 10 with 2 x's. I know I have the right answer. So keep in mind that it will help you to apply these processes if you remember to simplify their meanings. Again, if you're doing a problem where there's multiplication involved, you are using a form of the distributive property, because multiplication and distributive go together. On the other hand, if you're doing a problem where division is involved, you're probably doing a form of factoring. If you think that, or if you keep that in mind, especially whenever you bump into a word problem, then at least you kind of have an idea on what the numbers should be doing. And usually in math, once you understand what the numbers should be doing, it's not as bad of a question as what it seems. So good luck on this today, and again, ask questions, work on this worksheet, and knock it out.